"I'll give you everything I have. Bring her back," said the millionaire to the special boy. And everything changed. This story caught your interest. Subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's begin! Edward Montero was the kind of man whose mere presence could silence the world around him. At 47, he presided over an infrastructure empire headquartered in Denver, with branches reaching Washington, D.C., New York City, and even overseas contracts. The owner of an incalculable fortune, he was respected and feared in equal measure. But on that sweltering August morning, standing at the altar of the chapel in St. Clara's Hospital, in the Cherry Creek neighborhood, no amount of money, influence, or power could give him back what life had taken. The small white gurney before him held the still body of Julia, his 6-year-old daughter, who had been diagnosed days earlier with an unexplained neurological collapse that had left her in a deep vegetative state. Edward, a man who rarely expressed emotions in public, could now barely breathe. The pain robbed him of his strength and sense of time. The absence of Beatrice, his wife who had been in a coma for 3 years, still hung like a cold shadow over everything. The critical condition of his youngest daughter was a final blow to a man who had already lost more than he could bear. The farewell service, surrounded by white flowers and the discreet glances of business leaders, politicians and members of Denver's high society, proceeded with formality and respectful silence. The doctors had declared there was no more hope for Julia. They recommended turning off the machines and allowing nature to take its course. Few dared to approach Edward. He stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Julia's pale figure, as if by sheer force of will he could call her back to life. Larissa, his eldest daughter, remained by his side, displaying a composure admirable for someone only 23 years old. She had an elegant air, her face as still as a mask, and kept her arm intertwined with that of Philip Viana, her fiancé, a young executive who had risen quickly in business circles and gained Edward's trust in recent months. It was in the tense silence of the farewell that Matthew appeared. The boy, in simple clothes and with a discreet appearance, watched the ritual from afar. He was the son of the hospital's head nurse, lived in a nearby housing project, and, according to the staff, was too quiet for his age. At 12, Matthew walked the hospital corridors with the lightness of someone who knows pain but does not fear it. His mother was a widow, and since then he had developed a rare sensitivity. For some inexplicable reason on that day, something called him into the chapel. While adults whispered empty words and consoled each other out of obligation, Matthew approached the gurney with silent steps. His eyes held no tears but a kind of deep attention. Kneeling before Julia's body, he noticed something no one else there seemed to have perceived, a faint pinkish hue on the girl's lips. Curious, he lightly touched his fingers to her face. The temperature was not as cold as one would expect. Instead, there was a remnant of warmth, almost imperceptible but real. Startled and confused, Matthew touched the girl's neck, trying to imitate the gesture he had seen doctors make so many times. He felt a faint, almost imperceptible pulse beneath the skin. His heart raced. With his gaze fixed on the devastated businessman before him, he approached slowly. "Sir," he called in a trembling voice, I think she's still alive." Edward turned slowly, his eyes meeting the boy's with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Who are you? How dare you say that at a time like this? My name is Matthew, my mom works here. Please, sir, I know she's alive. There's a pulse weak, but it's there." At first, Edward reacted with disbelief and irritation, but something in the boy's eyes, an unexpected firmness, made him waver. Larissa held her father's arm, trying to calm him. "Dad, don't pay any attention. This isn't the time for—" But Edward was already approaching the gurney, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain. He followed the boy's instructions and with trembling fingers lightly pressed Julia's neck. When he felt the faint beat beneath his own fingers, something inside him broke. "My God," he whispered, the tears finally escaping. "Our doctor! Someone call a doctor now." The room erupted in confusion. Philip Viana tried to intervene, suggesting that Edward was emotionally distraught, but the businessman was no longer listening. Holding his daughter's hand, he uttered the phrase that would set the course for everything to come. "I'll give you everything I have. Just bring her back." Matthew didn't understand who Edward was addressing, God, the doctors, or himself. But the desperation in those words touched him deeply. Minutes later, Dr. James Almeida, the hospital's chief neurologist, was examining Julia with growing astonishment. It's almost impossible, but the boy is right. There are vital signs, extremely weak but steady. I don't understand how we didn't detect this before. Julia was immediately transferred to the pediatric ICU. Edward, for the first time in years, felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. He looked at Matthew with indescribable gratitude. "How did you know?" The boy shrugged, not knowing how to explain. "I just felt it. It happens sometimes. Mom says I have a gift." In the following days, Julia remained in critical condition, but was unequivocally alive. The doctors, initially incredulous, confirmed that she presented a very rare clinical picture, a form of induced catalepsy, a condition in which the body's signs become almost imperceptible, simulating brain death. The diagnosis, however, brought more questions than relief. "This isn't a common condition, nor is it spontaneous," Dr. Almeida explained in his office. "Toxicology tests revealed the presence of a rare and highly controlled substance, used only in clinical trials of induced comas. The use of this substance on a child is unusual, to say the least." Edward felt his blood run cold. "Are you suggesting someone did this to my daughter intentionally?" The doctor hesitated. "I can't make accusations, Mr. Montero, but I strongly recommend an investigation. This substance is not easily accessible. It requires specific authorizations and is only found in advanced research laboratories." Edward, who until then had only known despair, began to feel suspicion. With the image of his wife comatose for 3 years, he started to wonder if the two cases were connected. In the hospital corridors, far from watchful eyes, Philip Viana made an urgent call. "We have a problem," he whispered. "The girl is alive." "Yes, alive!" "And worse, they found traces of the substance." "No, I don't know how. Someone must have gotten the dosage wrong." "What?" "No, we can't try again. They're monitoring everything now." "Yes, I understand. I'll keep you informed." He hung up the phone, adjusting his expensive tie with nervous fingers. He didn't notice Matthew standing at the corner of the hallway, his attentive eyes hearing every word. The boy ran to the room where his mother, Sonia, was checking Julia's vital signs. "Mum," he called softly, "I need to talk to Mr. Montero. It's important." Sonia looked at her son with suspicion. "Matthew, you've already helped enough. Leave the family alone. They're going through a difficult time." "But, Mom, I heard something I shouldn't have. I don't think the girl got sick by accident." Sonia's eyes widened and she pulled her son into a corner. "What are you saying?" "Are you sure?" Matthew nodded, his expression so serious that Sonia had no choice but to take him to Edward. Meanwhile, at Viana Biotechnology, located in Denver's industrial district, Dr. Ronald Viana received an unexpected visit from his niece, Larissa. She entered the room with firm steps, her face a mask of composure, but her eyes revealed her turmoil. "Uncle, we need to talk." Ronald, a middle-aged man with graying hair and astute eyes behind thin glasses, gestured to a chair. "Larissa, my dear, I heard about the miracle with your sister. You must be relieved." "Relieved?" Larissa closed the door behind her. "Philip is panicking. He said you found the substance in her blood. How is that possible? You assured me it would be undetectable." The doctor sighed, taking off his glasses to clean them calmly. "There was a miscalculation. The dosage for a child should have been recalibrated. But this is a minor setback. The important thing is that the plan continues." "Minor? My father is furious. He's investigating. What if he finds out that we... Larissa couldn't finish the sentence. "He won't find out anything," Ronald assured her. "And even if he suspected, he would never imagine that his own daughter. Besides, who would believe it? You just followed our instructions, thinking you were helping your sister. The special headache syrup was a perfectly convincing explanation." Larissa bit her lip, nervous. "And my mother. Was that a miscalculation too?" Ronald stiffened. "Your mother was a different case. Beatrice discovered things she shouldn't have. But don't worry, she's perfectly safe in the Swiss clinic. And she will remain so as long as it's convenient." "And how long will that be convenient, Uncle?" "Until my father signs the contracts? Until the merger is complete? Or until I inherit everything?" Larissa's voice trembled. "You knew exactly what you were getting into when you came to me," he replied coldly. Remember? I'm tired of just being Edward Montero's daughter. I want my own empire. Your words, not mine. Larissa looked down. I never thought we would go this far. Far? Ronald laughed. We haven't even started. When your father transfers the controlling interest to you as part of the accelerated succession plan, and you marry Philip, Montero Infrastructure and Vienna Biotechnology will form the largest conglomerate in the country. That's worth a few sacrifices, don't you think? At the hospital, Edward listened intently to Matthew's account of the phone conversation he had witnessed. At first, he seemed reluctant to believe it, but something in the back of his mind was starting to click. Are you sure he mentioned substance? Those exact words? Matthew nodded vigorously. Yes, sir. And he seemed scared, like he'd done something wrong. Edward looked at George, his head of personal security, who stood silently in a corner of the room. George, I want everything on Vienna Biotechnology. Everything. Financial reports, research projects, employee histories, and I want discreet surveillance on Philip. Yes, sir, George replied, already pulling out his phone. Edward turned to Matthew. Thank you, son. You've already saved my daughter once. Now you may be helping to protect her again. Sonia placed a hand on her son's shoulder. Mr. Montero, if I may. Matthew has always had this sensitivity since he was little. He notices things others don't. Edward observed the boy with a new look. And how does this gift work? Matthew shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. I can't explain it. It's like a strong intuition. I feel when people are suffering, or when they're lying. And sometimes I feel when someone isn't really gone. Like with Julia, Edward concluded. Yes, I looked at her and I knew there was still life there. A tiny spark, but still burning. Edward was silent for a moment. Then he made a decision. George, I want you to arrange additional security for Julia's room. No one enters without my express authorization or Dr. Almeida's, and he hesitated, looking at Sonia. If you don't mind, I'd like Matthew to come visit me tomorrow. At my house. The nurse seemed surprised. Sir, Please, Edward interrupted. There's something in my wife's diaries. Notes about suspicions she had before the accident. Maybe Matthew can sense something that will help me understand. At the Montero mansion, located in the most exclusive neighborhood in Denver, Larissa returned from her meeting with her uncle. She found Philip in the library drinking brandy and nervously flipping through documents. How did it go with your father? He asked without looking up. I didn't see him. He's still at the hospital. Philip finally looked at her, irritation clear on his face. This complicates everything. The more time he spends with the girl, the more chances he has to find something out. And what do you suggest? That I convince him to abandon my sister. Larissa crossed her arms defensively. Philip gave a dry laugh. A few months ago, you didn't care that much about her. What changed? Everything, Larissa replied, collapsing into an armchair. When we started this, it was just a plan to accelerate the succession at the company. My father was distant, obsessed with work ever since Mom. Since the accident, I deserved recognition, a place by his side. That's all I agreed to. I never imagined you would use Julia. Philip approached, placing his hands on her shoulders. Larissa, we've been over this. Your sister was never in any real danger. The plan was just to induce a temporary state, so your father would realize what it would be like to lose another family member. That would make him speed up the succession plans, secure your future, our future, and my mother. Was she also part of this plan? Philip stiffened. Your mother was an unfortunate accident. Liar, Larissa said, pulling away. I heard my uncle today. He practically admitted they did something to her because she discovered things she shouldn't have. Larissa, you're exhausted, emotional. You're not thinking clearly. On the contrary, she replied, looking him in the eyes. I think I'm finally seeing clearly. At Sonia's house, in the housing project on the north side, she and Matthew shared a simple dinner. The boy was unusually quiet, pushing his food around with his fork without really eating. What's wrong, son? Matthew looked up. Mom, do you think Mr. Montero will be able to find out who hurt his daughter? Sonia sighed. I don't know, Matthew. He has resources, power. If anyone can find out, it's him. And his wife, the one in a coma. Do you think it was the same thing? The nurse frowned. Why do you ask that? Because I felt something strange when he talked about her. Like there's a connection he hasn't realized yet. And that man, the older daughter's fiancé, there's something wrong with him. I don't like the way he looks at Mr. Montero, like he's always calculating something. Sonia studied her son with a mix of pride and worry. Matthew, this gift of yours, it sometimes scares me how much you perceive. It scares you? He smiled faintly. Imagine me. That same night, Edward sat in the library of his mansion, surrounded by documents, old photos, and a leather-bound diary that had belonged to Beatrice. The pages revealed an observant and astute woman who recorded details that others would ignore. In the last entries, she mentioned concerns about the business partnership between Montero Infrastructure and Viana Biotechnology, notes about secret meetings, documents that disappeared, and a growing suspicion about Ronald Viana. The last entry, made the night before her accident, contained only one sentence. I found something out about Project Lazarus. I need to tell Edward before it's too late. The businessman felt a chill run down his spine. Project Lazarus? What was that name, and why had he never heard of it before? He flipped through more pages, looking for other references, but found nothing. He turned to George, who remained alert despite the late hour. Look up everything about a Project Lazarus related to Viana Biotechnology. Yes, sir. And what about Philip? Fair, what did you find out? George handed him a tablet with several photos. He visited the lab today, right after leaving the hospital. He was there for about 2 hours. He also received a call from Dr. Ronald, apparently a tense one, and he hesitated. And your daughter, Larissa, was also there today. She went in separately but left with him. They seemed to be arguing. Edward felt the weight of that information like a punch to the gut. His own daughter involved. Could it be possible? He then remembered something. The night before Julia's collapse, Larissa had mentioned she would give her sister some medicine for a headache. A special syrup, she had said. George, I want Larissa watched too, discreetly, and tomorrow when the boy comes, don't tell anyone, not even her. At the hospital, Dr. James Almeida reviewed Julia's latest test results with a puzzled expression. The substance in the girl's blood was dissipating naturally, and her brain signals were beginning to show increasing activity. It was as if she were slowly waking up from a deep sleep. His phone rang, displaying an unknown number. Dr. Almeida speaking. Doctor, this is Ronald Viana. The neurologist stiffened. Dr. Viana, how can I help you? I heard you're taking care of Edward Montero's daughter. A fascinating case from what I've heard. My patient's information is confidential, as you well know. Ronald gave a polite laugh. Of course. I just thought you might need a consultation. My lab has been studying altered states of consciousness for years. We could offer resources, experimental drugs. I appreciate the offer, but we're following standard protocols. And the girl is responding well. I see, the voice on the other end cooled. I just thought you should know. A doctor's career can be so volatile. Today you're the head of neurology, tomorrow. Who knows? Are you threatening me, Dr. Viana? Threatening? Not at all. Just an observation about life's uncertainties. Have a good night, doctor. And think about my offer. The call ended, leaving James with a bitter taste in his mouth. He looked at Julia's test results again and made a decision. He called Edward Montero. Mr. Montero, sorry to bother you so late. We need to talk urgently. I received an unsettling phone call. In the private clinic on the outskirts of Zurich, a woman in her early 40s looked out the window at the Swiss Alps. Although her gaze seemed vacant, there was a growing inner turmoil. Fragments of memory were returning, clearer each day. A man in a lab coat offering her tea. A secret file found on a computer. A name, Project Lazarus. And above all, the image of her daughters, Larissa and Julia, calling out to her. Beatrice Montero was fighting to emerge from the depths of an imposed sleep, while thousands of miles away, her husband was beginning to unravel the web that had separated them. In his luxurious apartment, Philip nervously dialed an international number. We need to speed things up, he said without preamble. Montero is investigating. And the girl is getting better. Yes, I understand the complexity, but we have no choice. How long until Project Lazarus is operational? 3 weeks. No, that's too long. We have to act before he finds out about Beatrice. In Sonia's house, Matthew woke up with a start in the middle of the night. He had dreamed of the woman in the portrait he had seen at the Montero mansion, the wife in a coma. In the dream she was awake, desperately trying to communicate something. A name. A place. And something about a project that could change the world or destroy it. Tomorrow, he decided, he would tell Mr. Montero everything. Something told him that time was running out. Not just for Julia, but for all of them. The next day, the Denver sky dawned heavy with dark clouds, as if nature itself reflected the growing tension between the Montero and Viana families. Edward arrived at the hospital early, determined not to leave his daughter's side until he fully understood what was happening. He found Dr. Almeida already in Julia's room, analyzing new test results. "How is she?" he asked, approaching the bed where the girl lay motionless, connected to several monitors recording her brain activity. "Surprisingly well," the doctor replied, not hiding a note of perplexity in his voice. "The substance is dissipating from her system, and we're observing increasing patterns of brain activity. It's almost as if she's trying to wake up." Edward's heart raced. "Does that mean she's going to recover?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, cautious. "I don't want to create false hope, Mr. Montero. Her condition is still serious, but there are promising signs. And after that phone call I received last night, I'm convinced we need to maintain constant vigilance." Edward nodded grimly. The doctor's account of Ronald Viana's call only confirmed his growing suspicions. "I've already increased security. No one enters this room without going through George first." On that subject, Almeida lowered his voice. "I analyzed the compounds found in Julia's blood and compared them with our pharmacological database. The substance has a very specific molecular signature. It's experimental, developed to induce controlled states of coma in patients with severe brain trauma. Only 3 labs in the country are authorized to research it. Let me guess, Viana Biotechnology is one of them." The doctor nodded. "In fact, they lead the research in this area. They have a project called Lazarus," Edward completed, making the doctor look at him with surprise. "How do you know that?" "It was in my wife's diaries. The last entry before her accident." Edward felt a lump in his throat as he said the word, realizing the terrible possibility that was beginning to take shape in his mind. "Dr. Almeida, my wife has been in a vegetative state for 3 years in Switzerland. Could it be possible? Could the same substance?" The neurologist paled. "Theoretically, yes. A larger dose, calibrated for an adult, could induce a deep coma state that would simulate irreversible brain damage. But why would someone do that?" Edward didn't answer, but his mind was working at full speed. He remembered the events preceding Beatrice's accident. She had mentioned concerns about the Vianas, about strange documents she had found. At the time, he was so absorbed in business that he hadn't paid proper attention. Now that negligence consumed him like acid. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Matthew and Sonia. The boy entered the room with cautious steps, his eyes immediately fixing on Julia. "She's better," he said, not as a question but as a statement. "How can you know?" Edward asked, intrigued. Matthew shrugged. "I can feel it. Yesterday there was just a spark. Today it's like a small flame." Dr. Almeida watched the boy with scientific interest. As a doctor, he was trained to trust in evidence, in measurable data. But how could he explain that this boy's intuitive observations corresponded exactly to the results from the sophisticated monitoring equipment? "Mr. Montero," Matthew called, "I dreamed about your wife last night." Edward stiffened. "What did you say?" "I dreamed about the lady from the portrait in your house. She was trying to say something. About a cold place with mountains. And about this project everyone is mentioning." Sonia placed a hand on her son's shoulder, visibly uncomfortable. "Matthew, I don't think it's appropriate." "No, please," Edward interrupted. "Let him speak. What else did you see, Matthew?" The boy closed his eyes as if trying to retrieve the images from the dream. She was in a white room. She could see mountains through the window. She was scared, but also determined. She wanted someone to know that she understood what they did. Something about a medicine that shuts people down, but not forever. And there was a man. A doctor, I think. She didn't trust him. Edward exchanged glances with Dr. Almeida, who seemed as disturbed as he was. "The clinic where Beatrice is located is in the Swiss Alps," Edward explained, "and it's run by a close associate of the Vianas. Mr. Montero," the neurologist spoke cautiously, "I know this may sound absurd, But if there's the slightest possibility that your wife is in the same condition as Julia, I need to see her, Edward concluded, determination evident in his voice. Immediately. At the Montero mansion, Larissa was coming down the stairs when she noticed the unusual commotion. Staff moved quickly, and George, the head of security, was giving urgent instructions over the phone. "What's going on?" she asked, approaching. George covered the phone's microphone. "Your father is arranging an urgent trip to Switzerland. He wants to see your mother." Larissa felt her blood run cold. "Why? Did something happen to her?" "I don't know, miss. But it seems related to your sister's condition. Mr. Montero wants you to stay here, taking care of company business during his absence." "I'll call him," Larissa replied, already pulling out her cell phone. George shook his head. "He asked not to be disturbed. He said he would talk to you before he leaves." Larissa quickly ran back up the stairs to her room, dialing Philip's number with trembling fingers. When he didn't answer, she tried her uncle. Ronald's voice sounded annoyingly calm on the other end of the line. "Uncle, we have a problem. Dad is going to Switzerland. I think he suspects something about Mom." "How could he?" Ronald's voice remained controlled, but Larissa detected the underlying tension. "No one knows the truth about her condition except for us and Dr. Schmidt. I don't know how, but he knows. And what if he manages to bring her back? What if she tells him what she saw?" "Calm down, Larissa. Your mother won't be coming back anytime soon. The dosage we administered ensures that. Besides, Dr. Schmidt is a loyal associate. He won't allow outside interference. And what if Dad simply transfers her to another hospital, another doctor? He has the resources, the power." There was a brief silence on the other end. "I'll take care of it. In the meantime, you need to act normally. Edward can't suspect your involvement." "My involvement?" Larissa's voice went up an octave. "I never agreed to what you did to my mother. I thought she had a genuine aneurysm." "Technically, she did," Ronald replied coldly. "The substance just facilitated the process. And as for not agreeing, you were perfectly happy to take on a more prominent role in the company after the incident. Don't play the innocent, niece." Larissa felt guilt gnaw at her from the inside. It was true. After Beatrice's accident, Edward had become more dependent on her in business. And she had seized the opportunity, believing the story they told her about a sad coincidence. "Anyway," Ronald continued, "it's too late for regrets now. We're all involved, including you who gave the medicine to your little sister." Larissa felt tears of anger and shame well up. "You assured me it wouldn't hurt her. You said it was just to make her sleep for a few hours to scare him. And it worked, didn't it?" The scare made Edward finally consider his own mortality, the fragility of the empire he built. It's exactly the push he needed to finalize the succession plan. "A few more days and the documents will be signed, putting you in effective control of the business. After you marry Philip, the company merger will be just a formality. Don't ruin everything now with sentimentality." The line went dead. Larissa threw her phone on the bed, feeling trapped. What had started as a plan to gain professional recognition had turned into something monstrous, and now there was no easy way out. At the Vienna lab, Ronald hung up the phone with a grave expression. Philip entered the room at that moment, carrying a folder of documents. "What happened?" "You looked tense. Edward is going to Switzerland. He wants to see Beatrice." Philip dropped the folder. "What? How did he find out?" "We don't know yet, but this complicates everything. If he brings her back and manages to reverse her state—" "She'll talk," Philip completed, turning pale. "About the documents she found, about Project Lazarus. We have to stop him." Ronald studied his nephew with calculated coldness. "There's another problem. Larissa is wavering. The family bond is speaking louder than ambition." "She was always the weak link," Philip said with contempt. "She never had the stomach for what really matters." "Even so, we need her. The merger only works if she inherits control of Montero infrastructure. And that only happens if Edward trusts her completely." Ronald stood up, walking to a safe built into the wall. He entered a combination and took out a small vial with a clear liquid. "I need you to go to Switzerland immediately. Get there before Edward. And what do I do when I'm there? Talk to Schmidt. Tell him to increase security and deny access to Beatrice under any pretext. If that fails," he held out the vial, "use this. It's an improved version, undetectable and much more potent." Philip hesitated before taking the vial. "Would this kill her?" "No," Ronald replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It would just put her in a state so deep that no one, not even that intuitive boy from the hospital, would be able to detect signs of life. At the hospital, Edward was meeting with Dr. Almeida and George to discuss the next steps. He had decided not only to go to Switzerland, but also to take Julia with him. It's risky to transport her in this state, the doctor warned. But I understand your concern. If the same people are behind both of their conditions, I can't leave her here vulnerable, Edward stated, especially with what we've discovered. Matthew, who had remained silent in a corner of the room, approached timidly. Mr. Montero, I think your wife is in danger. The three adults turned to him. Why do you say that, son? Edward asked. In my dream, someone was going to her, someone who wanted to push her even deeper. The boys struggled to find the right words. As if they knew you were coming and wanted to hide her where no one could find her. Edward exchanged alarmed glances with George. We need to leave now, today. He turned to the doctor. Can you prepare Julia for transport? We'll use my private jet. Yes, but I'll need a few hours to stabilize her and organize the necessary equipment. Edward nodded and then looked at Matthew. Would you like to come with us? Your sensitivity could be crucial. Sonia, who had been watching everything in silence until then, intervened. Mr. Montero, he's just a child. I can't allow him to— I want to go, Matthew interrupted, surprising his mother. I feel like I have to. Then you will come too, ma'am, Edward decided. Your experience as a nurse will be valuable, and Matthew will need you by his side. I'll pay whatever is necessary. I'll ensure your safety, please. Sonia hesitated, torn between fear of the unknown and the growing certainty that her son was inexplicably linked to this family drama. I'll need to arrange some things. My job, our house. George will take care of everything, Edward assured her. You will be under my protection. As preparations for the trip accelerated, Larissa arrived at the hospital, determined to see her father before he left. She found him in the hallway, giving instructions to a medical team about Julia's transport. Dad, she called, approaching quickly. What's happening? George said you're going to Switzerland to see Mum. Edward turned slowly to his daughter, his gaze more cautious than she had ever seen. Yes, there are developments in her condition that I need to check personally. What developments? No one told me anything. No one told me about a lot of things either, Larissa. His voice was low, controlled, but there was an underlying chill that made her shiver. What do you mean? Edward watched her for a long moment. Why did you give your sister that medicine the night before her collapse? Larissa felt as if the floor had opened up beneath her feet. What? She had a headache. It was just a syrup. Where did this syrup come from? Larissa stammered, feeling cold sweat run down her back. Philip gave it to me. He said it was a natural formula, developed in their labs. For children. And you didn't find that strange? You didn't question why he, of all people, would be interested in your sister's health? A child he barely interacted with. Larissa looked down, unable to face the accusation in her father's eyes. I thought he was just being thoughtful, trying to get closer to the family, or trying to eliminate her, Edward completed, his voice laden with a contained anger that made Larissa take a step back. Dad, it's not what you're thinking. I would never ever do anything to hurt Julia. Or Mom, you have to believe me. I want to believe you, he replied, and there was genuine pain in his voice. But there's a lot that doesn't make sense, Larissa. Too many coincidences. And now, instead of accompanying me to see your mother, Philip is suddenly too busy. He left for an urgent business trip. Larissa's heart raced. So that was it. Philip was going to Switzerland before them. For what? Dad, I need to tell you something, she began, her voice trembling. About Philip and my Uncle Ronald. I think they— She was interrupted by George's approach, who whispered something urgent in Edward's ear. Are you sure? Edward asked, his face paling. Absolutely, sir. Our contacts confirmed it. Dr. Schmidt is denying all visit requests. He says Mrs. Montero is undergoing a delicate experimental treatment that cannot be interrupted. What's happening? Larissa asked, alarmed by her father's expression. They're trying to stop me from seeing your mother, Edward replied, determination hardening his features. George, move up our departure. I want to be in the air in an hour. And what about Julia? Dr. Almeida will stabilize her for emergency transport. If that's not possible, We'll leave a reinforced security team with her. We can't wait. Larissa grabbed her father's arm. Let me go with you, please. Edward studied his daughter for a moment as if trying to see beyond the surface to the truth in her heart. Why? Because if what you suspect is true, if Mom is being kept in that state artificially, then I'm partly to blame for not realizing it sooner, for trusting the wrong people. Genuine tears streamed down Larissa's face. I need to fix this, Dad. I need to help bring her back. After what seemed like an eternity, Edward nodded slowly. Come then, but know that from now on I'll be watching your every move. Every word. At the private airport on the outskirts of Denver, the Montero infrastructure jet was being prepared for immediate takeoff. On board, a medical team was adapting the cabin to accommodate Julia and all the necessary equipment to keep her stable during the flight. Edward coordinated everything with the efficiency of someone who commands a corporate empire, but his eyes betrayed the deep anguish he felt. George approached discreetly, handing him a tablet. Sir, we managed to access the Swiss clinic's security system. These are images from 5 minutes ago. Edward looked at the screen where a security camera showed an elegant hallway. The date and time were clearly visible in the corner of the image. And walking down the hallway, talking to a doctor in a white lab coat, was Philip. He got there first, Edward murmured, his stomach clenching in a knot of apprehension. George, how long until we're in the air? 20 minutes, sir. Make it 10. And is anyone monitoring access to Beatrice's room? Yes, but the system has blind spots. We can't see inside her room. Edward felt the familiar sense of helplessness he had experienced when Beatrice had her accident, when Julia collapsed. But this time there was something different. This time he had a direction to follow, a concrete enemy to face. Matthew and Sonia arrived at the airport, brought by one of Edward's drivers. The boy seemed nervous, looking around with wide eyes. It was his first time at an airport, let alone a private jet. Are you okay? Edward asked, approaching him. I think so, Matthew replied hesitantly. Hey, it's just that I have this strange feeling, like we're racing against time. Edward knelt to be at the boy's eye level. We are, son. We're racing against people who have been planning this for a long time. People who have a lot of resources. But we have something they don't. What? You, Edward replied simply. Your ability to perceive what others don't. And now the truth. They operate in the shadows, relying on secrecy. But thanks to you, we're bringing everything to light. Matthew seemed both scared and proud of the responsibility. I'll do my best, sir. I know you will. Larissa watched the interaction from a distance, a strange mix of emotions stirring inside her. She had never seen her father speak with such gentleness and respect to a child, not even Julia. There was something in the bond between Edward and this unknown boy that made her heart ache with envy and regret. If she had remained loyal to her father, if she hadn't let herself be seduced by the Viana's promises. Her cell phone vibrated. A message from Philip. Where are you? Why aren't you answering my calls? She ignored it. She had made her decision. Whatever her role in this conspiracy, by action or omission, she would now do everything to undo the damage. For her mother, for her sister, and perhaps finally for the respect of the man she, despite everything, still loved more than any other. On the jet, as they crossed the Atlantic, Edward gathered everyone in the main cabin. Julia was stabilized in a special area, monitored by Dr. Almeida and a nurse. The rest of the group, Larissa, George, Matthew, and Sonia, formed an unlikely circle of allies. We need to be prepared for what we'll find, Edward began. If Philip arrived first, we can expect resistance. The clinic is private property with its own security. Legally, they have the right to deny access even to me. How are we going to get around that? Sonia asked. George intervened. I have contacts in the Swiss police. If we present enough evidence that Mrs. Montero is being held against her will or in inadequate conditions, they can issue an inspection warrant. What evidence do we have? Larissa questioned. Edward looked at her intently. That depends on you, daughter. How much are you willing to reveal about the Viana's involvement? Larissa took a deep breath. Everything. I'll tell you everything I know. Then start now, Edward said, turning on a recorder. From the beginning. And so, as the jet crossed oceans and continents, Larissa told her story. How Philip had meticulously courted her, gaining her trust. How he had gradually distanced her from her father, feeding resentments about her lack of professional recognition. How he had subtly planted ideas about succession in the company, about her rightful place. He never explicitly mentioned harming Mom or Julia, she explained, her voice choked with emotion. But there were insinuations, comments about how convenient it would be if Dad didn't have family distractions, how I could shine if I were alone in the line of succession. She confessed about the medicine for Julia, how Philip had assured her it was just a mild sedative that would cause temporary symptoms. Enough to scare Dad, to make him realize what it would be like to lose another loved one. I never thought it was something so serious. And what about your mother? Edward asked, his voice controlled, but his eyes revealing his pain. I always believed it was really an aneurysm, Larissa replied, tears streaming. Only recently, when I heard my Uncle Ronald talking, I realized they did something similar to her, something related to this Project Lazarus, which is a research program to develop substances capable of inducing altered states of consciousness, officially for medical purposes, treating brain trauma, inducing comas in patients who need neurological protection. But there was another side, which was, Larissa hesitated, control. Imagine a substance that could turn off a person temporarily, or keep them alive, but unable to communicate or resist. The military, corporate, political applications would be limitless. Edward closed his eyes, absorbing the horror of these revelations. And Beatrice found out. I think so. She was always observant, sharp, and she had access to many company documents, as her legal advisor. If she found something about Project Lazarus, she would be a threat, George completed. A threat that needed to be neutralized. Matthew, who had listened to everything in silence, then spoke. She's not lost. I can feel her trying to come back. Like Julia, she just needs help to find the way. Edward looked at the boy, finding comfort in his unshakable certainty. We're going to bring her back, Matthew. We're going to bring them both back. At the Swiss clinic, Philip walked through the elegant room where Beatrice Montero had remained. Apparently unconscious for 3 years, Dr. Schmidt, an austere middle-aged man, watched the monitors with a worried expression. Are you absolutely sure this dosage is safe? He asked in English with a strong German accent. She is already in a delicate state. It is imperative that she remain undetectable for the next few days, Philip replied coldly. Her husband is on his way with a medical team. If they find out she is responding to stimuli, I understand the financial implications, Schmidt cut in. But as a doctor, I must warn you. More suppression could cause permanent damage. Perhaps irreversible, Philip shrugged. It's an acceptable risk. For whom? For her, for science, or just for your pocket, Mr. Viana? For progress, Philip replied, irritated by the doctor's sudden attack of conscience. Project Lazarus goes beyond individuals. We are talking about a revolution in neurological medicine. A revolution built on silenced victims, Schmidt muttered, but he accepted the vial Philip handed him. Very well, but I'm registering my formal protest. And if there is any sign of deterioration, you will be generously compensated for the risks, Philip completed. As always. He approached the bed where Beatrice rested. Even after 3 years, there was still a serene elegance to her face. For a fleeting moment, Philip felt a pang of guilt, but he quickly pushed it away. Business was business, and this woman represented a $1 trillion obstacle between him and the largest corporate conglomerate in Latin America. Administer it now, he ordered. I want to see her sink completely before I leave. Dr. Schmidt prepared the syringe with visible reluctance. As he approached the intravenous access in Beatrice's arm, he did not notice a slight tremor in her eyelids, an almost imperceptible sign that, in the depths of that induced coma, Beatrice Montero was fighting to emerge. And thousands of miles away, somewhere over the Atlantic, Matthew woke up with a start from a brief nap, his eyes wide with panic. They're doing something to her, he whispered, his voice filled with urgency. Now they're trying to sink her where no one can reach her. Edward looked at the pilot, desperation evident on his face. How long until we land? 3 hours at least, Mr. Montero. That's not going to be enough time, Matthew murmured, tears streaming down his face. It's not going to be enough time. The private jet cut through the European sky at maximum speed, while inside the aircraft, a growing atmosphere of tension dominated every occupant. Edward couldn't stay seated, pacing back and forth in the main cabin, constantly checking his watch. "Can't we land somewhere closer?" He asked the pilot for the third time over the intercom. "Sir, we are already flying with special clearance, above the recommended speed. Zurich Airport is the closest that accepts jets of this size." Edward switched off the intercom with clear frustration. Matthew remained pale, sitting next to his mother, who stroked his hair with concern. "Do you still feel the same thing?" Edward asked, kneeling in front of the boy. Matthew nodded slowly. "Yes, but it's different now. It's like she's fighting, resisting." "My Beatrice was always a fighter," Edward murmured, a sad smile briefly appearing. He turned to George. "Any contact with the Swiss police?" "Yes, sir. I presented the recordings of Miss Larissa's confession and Julia's medical reports. They are sending a team to meet us at the airport, but they will need a court order to enter the clinic against the administration's will." "How long to get that warrant?" George hesitated. "Hard to say. Hours, maybe. The Swiss judicial system is meticulous." "We don't have hours," Matthew interrupted, his voice strangely firm for a child his age. "They're trying to push her deeper." Larissa, who had been lost in thought in a corner of the cabin, approached. "What if I called Philip? Pretend I'm on his side, try to delay him?" Edward studied his daughter with cautious eyes. "Why would he believe that now?" "Because he always thought I was weak, manipulable. I can use that to our advantage. Say I was scared by your accusations, that I ran away. That I want to meet him before you get to the clinic." "It's risky," George observed. "If he suspects, it's our best chance," Edward decided. "But you're not going to talk to him alone. I want to hear every word." Larissa nodded, picking up her cell phone with trembling hands. She took a deep breath, preparing for the greatest performance of her life. When the call connected, Philip's voice sounded annoyed on the other end. "Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "Philip," Larissa replied, her voice deliberately choked. "I'm scared. Dad is furious. He made terrible accusations against you and Uncle Ronald, about Mom, about Julia." "What exactly did he say?" Philip's voice was now cautious, calculating. "That you did something to Mom, that her accident wasn't an accident, and that you tried to do the same to Julia." Larissa took a dramatic pause. "Is it true, Philip? Did you really—" "Of course not," he interrupted quickly. "Your father is distraught over Julia's condition, looking for someone to blame. It's understandable but irrational." "He's coming to Switzerland," Larissa continued, "to see Mom. He says he's going to take her out of that clinic, bring her back to the States." There was a brief silence. "When does he arrive?" "I'm not sure. Maybe tomorrow. He didn't tell me." Larissa avoided looking at her father as she lied. "Philip, I'm scared. He accused me of being involved, of helping you hurt Julia, as if I were capable of doing something like that to my own sister. Where are you now?" Philip's voice softened, seductive as it always was when he tried to manipulate her. "At the apartment," Larissa lied. "I couldn't face him after those accusations, so I ran away. Philip, I need to see you to understand what's happening. I'm in Switzerland now on business. I know. George mentioned your sudden trip. That's why I started to doubt. Why would you travel exactly when Dad decides to see Mom?" "It's too much of a coincidence." Philip hesitated again. "Larissa, trust me. There are explanations for all of this. When your father arrives in Switzerland, I will personally accompany him to the clinic. We will show him that there is nothing wrong with the care your mother is receiving. Promise? Because if what he says is true, It's not." Philip's voice hardened. "And it would be very dangerous for you to believe these delusional accusations. Think about the future, Larissa. Our future. Everything we've worked for." Larissa closed her eyes, remembering all the seductive promises he had made to her over the years. The shared power, the recognition she had always craved. "You're right," she said finally, "but I need to understand everything. I'm flying to Switzerland on the next flight." "What?" "No, stay where you are. Your father—" "I'm not asking for permission, Philip," Larissa interrupted, allowing a bit of her true indignation to show. "My mother and my sister are at stake. I'll be there tomorrow." She hung up before he could protest further. Edward looked at his daughter with a new expression, something between surprise and a burgeoning pride. "Well played," he admitted. "That should keep him distracted, trying to prevent your imaginary arrival." "It wasn't all a lie," Larissa replied softly. "I really do. Intend to understand everything. and fix what I can. In Beatrice Montero's room, Dr. Schmidt watched the monitors with growing concern. Despite the new dose of the suppressive substance, his patient's brain patterns showed unusual activity. It was as if some part of Beatrice was actively resisting the drug's effects. "This is extraordinary," he muttered to himself, adjusting his glasses to examine the graphs more closely. In 3 years of treating this patient, he had never seen such a response. It was almost as if, "Any problem, doctor?" Philip's voice startled him. He hadn't heard him return to the room. "Just routine observations," he replied, discreetly changing the monitor's display to something more generic. Years of questionable medical practice had taught him to be wary of his own associates. "The patient is stable." Philip approached, observing Beatrice's serene face. "Are you sure? It doesn't look like she might be dreaming." "Impossible," Schmidt answered quickly. "The level of neural suppression induced by the substance eliminates the capacity for dream activity." Philip nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. I've received information that Edward Montero may arrive earlier than expected. We need to ensure this wing is completely isolated for the next 24 hours. "That will be complicated," Schmidt replied cautiously. "He is the husband, legally responsible for her. Denying access could bring legal trouble for the clinic. The clinic will be generously compensated for any legal inconveniences." Philip checked his watch. "I need to make a few calls. Don't let anyone in this room. No one." When Philip left, Schmidt returned to the monitors, restoring the view of the complex brain patterns. Something was happening there, something that defied everything he knew about neuroscience and the effects of the Project Lazarus substance. After years of cooperating with the Vianas, receiving huge sums to keep Beatrice Montero in a vegetative state, the Swiss doctor was beginning to feel the weight of his choices. He was not a religious man, but there were limits to how much he could compromise his professional ethics, especially now seeing clear signs that Beatrice was, against all odds, fighting to return. He made a decision. He picked up his tablet and began to meticulously document all the brain readings, all the evidence that the patient was responding anomalously. If the authorities eventually got involved, he would have his own insurance, proof that he had kept accurate records, even if his past actions had been questionable. On the jet, Dr. Almeida urgently called Edward to the improvised medical area where Julia was being monitored. "What's wrong?" Edward asked, his heart pounding as he saw the doctor's excited expression. "Her brain patterns have changed significantly in the last hour," Almeida explained, pointing to the monitors. "There's a consistent increase in activity in the areas associated with consciousness. It's as if she's rising toward the surface." Edward approached his daughter, holding her small hand in his. "You can do it, Princess," he whispered. "Keep fighting." Matthew silently entered the medical area, his eyes immediately fixing on Julia. "The flame is stronger," he said simply. Dr. Almeida looked at the boy with scientific fascination. "How do you do that? How do you know?" Matthew shrugged. "I just feel it. Like when you bring your hand close to something hot without touching it. You know the heat is there even without seeing it." "Fascinating," the doctor murmured. "If we could understand and quantify this ability—" "Doctor," Edward interrupted gently, "I believe Matthew's gift is beyond our current science. And honestly, right now I only care that it works." Almeida nodded, understanding. "The most intriguing thing is the synchronicity. Julia began to show signs of greater brain activity at approximately the same time Matthew reported, feeling Beatrice fighting against something. Could there be a connection? A bond between mother and daughter, even separated by continents? Perhaps, Edward replied, hope lighting up his tired eyes. Beatrice and Julia always had a special connection. It was almost as if they could communicate without words. "I need to document this," Almeida decided. "With your permission, of course. Regardless of the outcome, we are witnessing something medically unprecedented." Edward nodded distractedly, his attention fully focused on his daughter. For a fleeting moment, he was sure he saw a slight movement in her fingers, as if she were trying to squeeze the hand that held hers. Meanwhile, at the Swiss clinic, Dr. Schmidt noticed an even more extraordinary pattern. The moments of Beatrice's greatest brain activity seemed to be synchronized with specific times, as if she were responding to some external stimulus that only she could perceive. In his locked office, Philip furiously dialed Ronald in the United States. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Larissa is coming here." "What? Why?" Apparently, Edward made accusations. "She's confused, scared. Says she wants to understand what's happening." "That doesn't make sense," Ronald replied, his voice reflecting suspicion. "If Edward really suspected, the last thing he would do is leave Larissa alone." Philip felt a cold knot in his stomach. "You think she's lying? That she's with him?" It's a possibility we must consider. Larissa has always been more attached to her family than to business, despite her ambitions. If forced to choose. Then Edward might be arriving sooner than we think," Philip concluded, his anxiety growing. "Maybe he's already on his way from the airport. Or maybe he's already arrived," Ronald suggested grimly. "We can't risk it. Use the emergency protocol. That would mean, yes, no turning back, but it's necessary now. If we lose Beatrice, if she wakes up and tells what she knows—" Philip hesitated. It was one thing to keep someone artificially in a coma, but what Ronald was suggesting was something else entirely. There should be another way. "There isn't," Ronald cut in mercilessly. "And if you're having doubts now, maybe I made a mistake putting you in this position. Remember what's at stake, nephew. Billions. Control of two of the largest companies in the Southern Hemisphere. Power that most men only dream of having." "It's not doubts," Philip replied quickly. "Just practical considerations. If something happens to her here in Switzerland, there will be investigations. Not if it looks natural. The reserve substance leaves no detectable traces. Everyone will say it was a sad complication of her already delicate state. Even Schmidt will sign the certificate if he knows what's good for him." Philip hung up without answering, feeling trapped. He had entered the plan out of ambition, seduced by Ronald's promises and the prospect of controlling the Montero empire through Larissa. Keeping Beatrice in a vegetative state had seemed like a necessary inconvenience. But what Ronald was suggesting now— He looked at the small vial he carried in his pocket. The reserve substance, as Ronald called it, developed secretly in the Vienna labs. It was the crown jewel of Project Lazarus, capable of inducing a complete and irreversible neurological shutdown, without leaving any trace detectable by current forensic techniques. Originally created as a potential chemical weapon for sale to foreign governments, it had never been tested on humans. Until now it was just a theory, a dark possibility locked in a safe. But Ronald had always been more pragmatic, less constrained by ethical considerations. Edward's jet began its descent towards Zurich Airport. George was receiving constant updates on his tablet. "Sir, the Swiss police have confirmed they will be waiting for us." They managed to expedite the court order due to the gravity of the accusations and the evidence we presented. "How long from the airport to the clinic?" Edward asked. "By helicopter, less than 30 minutes. I've already arranged the transport." Edward nodded, grateful for his security chief's efficiency. He turned to Larissa. "You stay with Julia. Dr. Almeida will stay with you." "No," Larissa protested. "I need to go with you. If Philip is there, I can distract him, confront him." "It's too dangerous," Edward replied. "If he really did what we suspect, he's capable of anything." "That's exactly why you need me," Larissa insisted. "He still believes he can manipulate me. That gives us an advantage." Edward studied his daughter, noticing a determination he had never seen before. "And what if he tries to use you against me?" "He won't succeed," she replied simply. "Not anymore." After a moment of reflection, Edward nodded. "George and 2 security guards will stay with you at all times. At the first sign of danger, they get you out of there." "Understood," Larissa agreed, gratitude evident in her eyes. "And me?" Matthew asked shyly. "I want to help too." Edward knelt again before the boy. "You've already helped more than you can imagine, Matthew. But this—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "This is now dangerous. Adults capable of terrible things to protect their secrets." "But I can feel things you can't," the boy insisted. "I can help find Mrs. Beatrice, know if she's coming back or sinking." Sonia placed her hands protectively on her son's shoulders. "Matthew, please. We've already risked so much coming here." "He's right," Dr. Almeida interjected unexpectedly. "Matthew's sensitivity could be crucial. If Beatrice is going through the same process as Julia, someone with his ability to detect subtle signs would be invaluable." Edward looked at Sonia, understanding her. "Dilemma. The decision is yours. If you allow it, I promise he will always be under protection. Never alone. The nurse looked from her son to his small patient, Julia, whose condition was visibly improving since Matthew had found her on what everyone thought was her deathbed. There was something special about him, a gift she couldn't deny or explain. The gift that could save another life. He stays with me the whole time, she finally decided, and at the first sign of danger, we're out. Agreed, Edward concurred. The plane touched down on Swiss soil promptly at 6:42 p.m. local time. At the airport, a police escort was already waiting, led by a middle-aged inspector named Muller, who spoke English with a heavy accent. "Mr. Montero," he greeted formally, "we have analyzed the evidence sent by your chief of security. The judge has issued a warrant allowing immediate access to the clinic and to the patient Beatrice Montero, regardless of the institution's internal policies. It also authorizes emergency toxicology tests." "Thank you, Inspector," Edward replied, relief evident in his voice. "As for my youngest daughter, Julia, we have already arranged for a medical team to receive her at the University Hospital of Zurich. It is the best neurological facility in the region." Edward nodded, grateful for the Swiss efficiency. Dr. Almeida was already coordinating with the local medical team for Julia's transfer. Everything was falling into place. "Let's go," Edward said, his determination renewed. Every minute counts. At the clinic, Philip received an alert from his contact at the airport. Edward Montero's jet had just landed. And worse, he was being met by police officers. "Damn it," he muttered, quickly calculating his options. Calling Ronald was out of the question. His uncle would just insist on the emergency protocol. He needed to buy time, find a way out that didn't involve crossing that fatal line. Dr. Schmidt burst into his office without knocking. "Mr. Viana, I've received an official communication. The police are on their way with a court order. They demand immediate access to Mrs. Montero." Philip stood up, trying to stay calm. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes at most. They're coming by helicopter. What is the clinic's protocol for these situations?" Schmidt looked uncomfortable. "Normally, we would comply with the warrant immediately. The clinic cannot get involved in legal obstructions. It would damage our international reputation." "And medical confidentiality? The patient's delicate condition? The warrant specifically overrides those considerations. Besides," Schmidt hesitated, "besides, the patient is showing increasing signs of brain activity. It would be unethical to continue suppressing that, especially under legal scrutiny. We are talking about medical evidence that cannot be ignored or falsified." Philip felt the ground disappear from under his feet. This was the end. If Beatrice was really emerging, if she could communicate, everything he had worked for would be destroyed. His hand instinctively closed over the vial in his pocket. A single injection would solve everything. "I need to see the patient," he said abruptly. "Alone!" Schmidt took a step back, something in his medical instinct alerting him. "That will not be possible. As medical director, I am assuming direct control of Mrs. Montero's case, given the imminent arrival of the authorities. Doctor, I think you've forgotten who finances a large part of this institution," Philip threatened, his voice turning icy. "One phone call from me to the board of directors would have no immediate effect," Schmidt completed with surprising firmness. "And at this moment, my primary responsibility is to the patient and the law. I'm sorry, Mr. Viana, but I must ask you to wait in the visitors' lounge while I prepare Mrs. Montero for the arrival of her family and the authorities." Philip watched the doctor leave, rage boiling under his apparent calm. Schmidt had chosen a dangerously inconvenient moment to reclaim his professional ethics. He had to act quickly. Leaving the office, he took not the path to the waiting room, but a side corridor he knew well from his many visits to the clinic. There was more than one way to get to Beatrice's room. In the helicopter, Edward kept his eyes fixed on the alpine landscape below, his heart racing as they approached the clinic. Beside him, Larissa held his hand, a gesture of closeness they hadn't shared in years. "Dad," she said softly, "I wanted to apologize. For everything. For not being strong enough to resist their manipulations." Edward squeezed his daughter's hand. "I'm also to blame. I was so absorbed in the company, in my own pain after your mother's accident. I didn't see what was happening right under my nose. I didn't see how much you needed me. Still, I should have realized. Philip never really cared about me. It was always about the company, about the merger, about control. People like him are experts at finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them, Edward replied. Don't blame yourself too much. The important thing is that we're in this together now, a family again. On the other side of the helicopter, Matthew watched the interaction in silence, feeling the sincerity of the shared emotions. Then suddenly his body tensed. Sonia immediately noticed the change. Matthew, what is it? She's in danger, the boy whispered, his eyes wide. Right now. Someone is in her room. Someone with bad intentions. Edward immediately leaned toward the pilot. Faster. It's a life-or-death emergency. At the clinic, Philip moved silently down the service corridor that led to the critical care wing. He knew the staff's routine, knew there would be only one nurse on duty at that time, easily distracted by a false emergency call in another sector. The vial weighed in his pocket like a stone. One injection into the IV line, and in minutes Beatrice Montero would be beyond any possibility of recovery. A tragic complication, they would say, unfortunately common in patients with a long history of a vegetative state. He was just a few feet from the room when he heard voices. He retreated into the shadows of the corridor, watching Dr. Schmidt speaking with two uniformed nurses. Prepare Mrs. Montero for immediate transfer to the intensive care unit. I want full monitoring, continuous recordings of brain activity. The police and the family will be here in minutes, and I want irrefutable documentation of her current state. Philip felt his plan crumble. With so many witnesses, with continuous activity records, it would be impossible to execute the emergency protocol without leaving clear evidence of interference. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from Ronald. Have you solved the problem? He took a deep breath, making a decision. He would not be the final executor of Ronald's plan. He would not cross that line. There were other paths, other ways to save himself. Perhaps he could feign ignorance, pin all the blame on his uncle. After all, what concrete proof was there against him, besides Larissa's word? As he rapidly devised defense strategies, he didn't notice the growing activity at the clinic's heliport. The sound of blades cutting through the night air announced the arrival of Edward Montero. In Beatrice's room, Schmidt was personally supervising the transfer preparations when he noticed something extraordinary on the monitors. My God, he murmured, approaching the screen. That's alpha wave activity. It's increasing exponentially. The nurses approached, equally surprised. On the bed, almost imperceptibly, Beatrice Montero's fingers moved, a slight but unmistakable contraction. She's coming back, Schmidt whispered, scientific excitement momentarily overpowering his guilt for the years of complicity. After all this time, she's finding her way back. At that exact moment, the main elevator doors opened, revealing Edward Montero, Larissa, George, and a police escort led by Inspector Muller. Behind them, Matthew and Sonia watched the scene with apprehension. Where is my wife? Edward demanded, striding down the hall. Schmidt came out of the room to meet him. Mr. Montero, I am Dr. Schmidt, the medical director. Your wife is being transferred? Edward interrupted, noticing the activity. Why? What's happening? Mr. Montero. The doctor seemed genuinely emotional. Your wife is showing increasing signs of brain activity, patterns consistent with an emergence of consciousness. We are transferring her for intensive monitoring. Edward felt his legs weaken, hope and fear warring within him. She's waking up? It's premature to say for sure, but the signs are promising. Extremely promising. Larissa covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming freely. Mom? Matthew, who had remained quiet until then, suddenly stepped forward. He's here, he said with urgency. The bad man. He's hiding, but he's close. Inspector Muller looked at the boy in surprise. But George was already in action, signaling to the other security guards. Search every corridor, every room, Edward ordered. Find Philip Viana. Schmidt looked disturbed. Mr. Viana was here just a few minutes ago. I asked him to wait in the visitors' lounge, but he didn't obey, Edward completed grimly. Inspector, I believe the man who tried to keep my wife artificially in a coma is in this building, possibly still trying to harm her. Müller nodded, giving quick orders in German to his officers. In minutes, the entire clinic was on high alert. Edward approached Schmidt. Doctor, I need to be honest. I know you were part of this. Maybe not from the beginning, maybe not fully understanding, but you were part of it. The doctor did not try to deny it. Yes, the Vianas funded important research here. When they brought your wife, they explained that she had suffered irreversible brain damage. The substance, they said, was just for comfort, to prevent possible seizures. Only later did I understand the true purpose. When exactly? Schmidt looked away. About a year ago, Beatrice started showing unexpected signs of recovery. Ronald Viana instructed me to increase the dosage. That's when I realized we weren't treating but suppressing. And you still continued, Edward couldn't hide the contempt in his voice. Yes, Schmidt admitted. To my eternal shame. But today, when I saw the patterns changing drastically, when Philip showed up with that stronger substance, I couldn't go on. Some lines once crossed don't allow you to return to the person you were. Inspector Miller returned hastily. We've located Philip Viana trying to leave the clinic through the back. He's in custody now. Edward felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. I want to see her, he said simply. Now? Schmidt led him to the room where Beatrice was awaiting transfer, still connected to several monitors. Edward approached slowly, almost fearfully, seeing the face of the woman he loved for the first time in 3 years without the veil of lies between them. Beatrice, he called softly, holding her hand. I'm here, my love. I finally understand. I've finally come to get you. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, Beatrice's fingers squeezed his, a weak but unequivocal movement. Edward looked at the monitor, where green lines danced in increasing patterns of activity. Tears streamed freely down his face as a miraculous truth unfolded before him. Beatrice was coming back. After 3 years of imposed darkness, she was finding her way back to the light. Behind him, Matthew smiled gently. The flame is getting stronger, he said. Like Julia's. In the hallway, Philip was being escorted by police officers, his hands cuffed behind his back. As he passed Larissa, their eyes met, his full of contained fury, hers surprisingly calm. It was you, he accused in a low voice. You betrayed me. No, Larissa replied serenely. I just chose my real family. Something you would never understand. As Philip was taken away for interrogation, Larissa entered Beatrice's room, standing beside her father. Edward extended his free arm, pulling her close to them, forming a family circle that had been broken for so long. Julia's missing, Larissa murmured. She's on her way, Edward replied. Dr. Almeida called. She's responding well at the hospital, showing increasing signs of consciousness. He looked at Matthew, who was watching the scene from the doorway. Thanks to this extraordinary young man. Matthew shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just saw what was there to be seen. Anyone could have. No, son, Edward gently contradicted. Not just anyone. Only someone with a very special gift. Her gift that saved my family. At the Zurich hospital, Julia slowly opened her eyes for the first time in days, looking confused at the unfamiliar ceiling. Dr. Almeida, noticing the movement, immediately approached. Hello. Julia, he said softly in Portuguese. You've been asleep for a while. Your father will be here soon. The girl blinked, processing the words. Then, in a voice hoarse from disuse, she asked, Mummy? The doctor smiled, surprised that her first word was that one. Your mother is waking up too, little one. You'll be together very soon. Julia smiled faintly before closing her eyes again, this time in a natural, restful sleep. The monitors showed normal, healthy brain patterns. The induced chemical nightmare was finally ending. At the police station, Philip sat in an interrogation room, staring at Inspector Müller with contempt. I don't know what you're talking about, he repeated stubbornly. I came to Switzerland on business. I visited the clinic only as a courtesy, to check on Mrs. Montero's condition before Edward's arrival. And the vial found in your pocket? Miller asked calmly. Our lab is already analyzing the substance. Philip maintained a neutral expression. A personal vitamin supplement. Nothing illegal. We'll see. Miller flipped through a few pages of his file. In the meantime, Miss Larissa's confession, the clinic's medical records, and the toxicological evidence in young Julia's case paint a rather convincing picture. Not to mention that your uncle, Ronald Viana, is now under investigation in the United States. It seems he tried to destroy evidence at the lab when he heard about your detention. Philip felt his blood run cold. Ronald had always been the mastermind behind everything, the true architect of the plan. If he was destroying evidence, it meant he was preparing to pin all the blame on his nephew. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "I can clarify a few details. In exchange for consideration in my case." Müller smiled slightly. "I'm listening, Mr. Viana." At the clinic, Beatrice was transferred to the ICU, where a team of neurologists monitored her progress with scientific fascination. The case would be studied for years, a woman emerging from an induced coma after 3 years, with surprisingly limited neurological damage. Edward remained by her side constantly, speaking softly, recounting the lost years, promising a future where they would all be together again. Larissa took turns between her mother's room and visits to the hospital, where Julia was recovering quickly. Matthew, in turn, had become a constant and comforting presence. His ability to feel Beatrice's progress offered hope in the most difficult moments, when the road back seemed too arduous for her. One quiet afternoon, while Edward had briefly stepped out to get coffee, Matthew found himself alone with Beatrice. He approached the bed, observing her serene face. "You're almost there, ma'am," he said softly. "The flame is so strong now." To his surprise, Beatrice's eyes slowly opened, unfocused at first, but gradually fixing on him with growing clarity. "Who?" The word came out as a whisper, almost inaudible. "I'm Matthew," he replied, gently holding her hand. "I helped find you and Julia." Beatrice blinked slowly, processing the words. "Julia? She's fine. Waking up, like you. Everyone is fine now." A faint smile formed on Beatrice's lips. "Thank you," she whispered, weakly squeezing the boy's hand before closing her eyes again, exhausted by the effort. When Edward returned, he found Matthew smiling, silent tears streaming down his face. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed. "She woke up," Matthew replied simply. "For a moment." She spoke. They asked about Julia. Edward dropped the coffee cup, spilling the hot liquid on the floor as he rushed to his wife's side. "Beatrice, my love." She didn't respond immediately, having fallen back into a natural sleep. But the monitor showed brain activity consistent with partial consciousness. "It's normal," explained the nurse, who rushed in at the sound of the breaking cup. "Patients emerging from prolonged states of unconsciousness often have brief moments of lucidity before falling back asleep. It's part of the process." Edward looked at Matthew with infinite gratitude. "You were here. You witnessed it." "Yes," the boy replied. "She knows everyone is okay now. She can truly rest." In the United States, the news of Philip Viana's detention in Switzerland and Ronald's subsequent arrest created an earthquake in business circles. Project Lazarus was exposed, its ethical and legal ramifications generating international headlines. Viana Biotechnology faced lawsuits, investigations, and a reputational crisis that threatened its very existence. But for Edward, none of that mattered as much as the miracle unfolding before him. His family, which he had thought irremediably destroyed, was slowly coming back together. A week later, Julia was transferred to the same clinic where Beatrice was recovering. The two were placed in adjacent rooms, allowing the family to remain united during the recovery process. It was in this setting of renewed hope that Beatrice finally awoke completely, her eyes meeting Edward's with immediate recognition. "You found me," she whispered, her voice still weak but clearly audible. "I will always find you," he replied, kissing her hand. "No matter how far you go." Beatrice smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "How long?" 3 years, Edward replied softly. "But we're together now, all of us. Julia," there was an urgency in her voice, "she's fine." In the next room recovering, they tried to do the same to her, but they failed, thanks to an extraordinary boy. As if summoned by his words, Matthew appeared shyly at the door, accompanied by Sonia. Beatrice looked at him, an intuitive recognition in her eyes. "It was you." In the darkness, I felt someone calling, a small light showing the way back. Matthew approached, his usual shyness momentarily forgotten. "You were never really lost, ma'am, just temporarily hidden." Beatrice extended her hand to him, and he held it gently. "Thank you," she said simply, but with a deep emotion that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Larissa entered the room, hesitant, carrying the weight of guilt for her part, however indirect in the family's suffering. Beatrice turned to her daughter, her eyes filled not with accusation but with love. "Larissa," she called softly. "My daughter." "Mom," Larissa broke down in tears, kneeling beside the bed. "Forgive me. Please forgive me. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Beatrice stroked her daughter's hair with still weak fingers. "There is nothing to forgive. You were a victim too. We all were." Edward watched the scene, his heart overflowing with gratitude. Against all odds, his family was reunited. Damaged, yes, marked by the scars of betrayal and separation, but alive, together, with a future ahead of them. He looked at Matthew, the unlikely catalyst of this miracle. A boy ordinary in the world's eyes, but the bearer of an extraordinary gift that transcended scientific understanding. A gift of seeing beyond appearances, of feeling the spark of life where others saw only its absence. "I'll give you everything I have," he had promised at what he thought was Julia's funeral. And now, with his family restored, he knew exactly how to fulfill that promise. On a sunny morning 2 weeks later, when Beatrice could already sit in a wheelchair and Julia was running through the clinic gardens as if she had never been on the edge of the abyss, Edward gathered everyone for an announcement. "After everything we've been through," he began, "I've realized some fundamental truths about what really matters, about the price of power and unchecked ambition." He looked at Matthew and Sonia. "And about the generosity that can come from the most unexpected places." He took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Sonia. "This is for you. Her new beginning." Sonia opened the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she read the contents. "Mr. Montero, this is too much. We can't accept it." "You can and you must," Edward insisted. "A new house in Denver. A full educational scholarship for Matthew, all the way through university. And a fund so you can open that community clinic you told me about." Matthew looked at the adult with astonishment. "But why?" Edward knelt to be at the boy's eye level. "Because I promised to give you everything I have if you brought Julia back. And you not only brought her back, but also Beatrice and, in a way, all of us. So this," he pointed to the envelope, "is just the beginning of fulfilling that promise." Beatrice smiled approvingly. "And we have another announcement," she said, holding her husband's hand. "We are establishing the Renaissance Foundation for ethical neurological research and support for families with members in comatose or altered states of consciousness. And we want you to be a part of it," Edward added. "Sonia, with your nursing experience? And Matthew—" "Me?" The boy looked confused. "Your gift, Matthew. It's unique, precious. It could help so many people, find so many flames that others believe have been extinguished." Matthew looked to his mother for guidance. Sonia, still emotional from the unexpected generosity, just nodded. "It would be an honor," he finally replied. Julia, who had been playing nearby, ran to Matthew, hugging him impulsively. "How are you going to stay with us? Forever?" The boy smiled, awkwardly returning the hug. "Not forever, but for a long time." Larissa watched everything with a melancholic smile. Her own future was still uncertain. There would be consequences for her involvement, even if manipulated. But redemption, she realized, came not from the absence of punishment, but from the opportunity to rebuild, to do better, to choose differently. As the Montero family prepared for a new chapter, united not just by blood, but by the shared experience of near loss and miraculous reunion, one truth remained crystal clear: true bonds, those that transcend interest and convenience, are indestructibly powerful. They can be tested, stretched to the limit, almost broken, but never completely shattered as long as a single spark of love remains. And sometimes, all it takes to reignite that flame is a single gaze that sees beyond appearances, that sees life where others only perceive its absence. A gaze like Matthew's, the boy who not only saved lives but restored an entire family. 6 months had passed since the events in Switzerland. It was a sunny summer afternoon in Denver, when the helicopter landed on the heliport of the Renaissance Foundation, a modern complex that combined a state-of-the-art research center and a neurological rehabilitation clinic. The main building, with its bold lines and large windows that allowed generous natural light, stood imposingly in the Cherry Creek neighborhood, not far from the old Montero mansion. Edward stepped out of the helicopter, helping Beatrice immediately after. Although she still needed a cane for longer walks, her recovery had been remarkable. The Swiss doctors, initially skeptical about the chances of full rehabilitation after 3 years in an induced vegetative state, now studied her case as an extraordinary phenomenon of human neuroplasticity. "Nervous?" Edward asked, holding his wife's hand as they walked toward the entrance. Beatrice smiled, her eyes reflecting a hard-won serenity. "A little. It's the first time I'll be speaking in public since before." "You'll be brilliant, as always," he assured her, kissing her forehead with reverence. "Besides, we're all here, the whole family." Waiting for them in the main lobby were Julia, now almost 7, and Larissa. The girl ran to hug her parents as soon as she saw them, while Larissa approached more reservedly, still carrying the weight of guilt despite months of family reconciliation. "Mommy, there are so many people," Julia exclaimed, bouncing with the inexhaustible energy of a recovered childhood. "And the TV is here. Are we going to be on the news?" Beatrice laughed, stroking her daughter's hair. "Probably, dear. It's an important day for all of us." Larissa stepped forward, adjusting the badge that identified her as the Foundation's Director of Social Responsibility. "Everything is ready. The auditorium is full. The press is here, officials." Even the Secretary of Health confirmed his attendance. Edward nodded, satisfied. The official inauguration of the Renaissance Foundation was the culmination of months of intense work, planning, and a complete restructuring of priorities, both business and personal. "Have Matthew and Sonia arrived yet?" he asked, looking around. "They're in the prep room with Dr. Almeida. The first patient for the demonstration is with them." Edward nodded. The demonstration would be the highlight of the event. For the first time, publicly, Matthew would use his extraordinary gift to identify signs of consciousness in patients diagnosed as irrecoverable. "Let's get ready then," he decided, guiding the family toward the backstage area. As they walked down the wide corridor decorated with vibrant works of art, part of the Foundation's art therapy program, Edward reflected on the profound transformation they had experienced as a family. The exposure of Project Lazarus and the subsequent investigation of the Vianas had caused an earthquake in American business circles. Ronald faced multiple criminal charges, while Philip, after cooperating with the authorities, was serving his sentence in a halfway house. The once powerful Viana biotechnology had been restructured under court supervision, with its legitimate projects preserved and the controversial ones shut down. But for Edward, the most significant transformation had occurred within his own family and within himself. The near-tragic estrangement from his loved ones had made him completely rethink his priorities. Montero infrastructure continued to operate, but Edward had delegated much of the operational control to trusted executives, dedicating himself primarily to the Renaissance Foundation. His old office on the top floor of the corporate building in the financial center had been traded for a more modest but bright room in the Foundation's complex, from where he could see the therapeutic gardens frequented by recovering patients. Backstage at the auditorium, they found Matthew, now almost 13, visibly nervous in his new suit, a gift from Edward for the occasion. Beside him, Sonia, elegant in a navy blue dress, adjusted her son's tie with proud hands. "Do you remember everything we practiced?" she asked for the umpteenth time. "Mom," the teenager protested, rolling his eyes with that typical impatience of his age, "we've done this dozens of times in the last few months. It'll be fine." Seeing Edward and his family approach, Matthew smiled, his face lighting up. The special bond between him and the Monteros had only strengthened with time. "Nervous?" Edward asked, repeating the same question he had asked Beatrice minutes earlier. "A little," Matthew admitted. "Hey, it's different doing this in front of so many people. What if it doesn't work? What if I don't feel anything today, of all days?" Beatrice approached, gently placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then we will have learned something important about your gift, that it has its own time and rhythm like everything in life. We don't intend to replace science with the extraordinary," she emphasized. "On the contrary, we want to use the extraordinary to expand the horizons of science. Understanding Matthew's gift could lead us to new techniques, new equipment, new therapies that will benefit patients all over the world." As she concluded her speech, Beatrice invited Edward to the stage. As the Foundation's CEO, he introduced the team of renowned scientists and doctors who had left prestigious institutions to join this pioneering initiative. He spoke about the partnerships with national and international universities, the rigorous documentation and validation protocols, and the humanistic philosophy that permeated all their work. Because at the end of the day, he concluded, it's about restoring dignity and recognizing humanity where others only see absence. It's about never giving up on a life, no matter how tenuous its connection to our world may seem. The time had come for the practical demonstration. A silence heavy with expectation filled the auditorium as Mauricio Santos was brought in on a special gurney. His wife and daughters watched with teary eyes from the front row. Hope and fear equally stamped on their faces. Dr. Almeida took the microphone, explaining the patient's medical history with clinical precision. He showed brain scans, graphs of electrical activity, and detailed all the conventional diagnoses that had led to the conclusion of a permanent vegetative state. What we will do today is not a spectacle, he warned seriously. It is a scientific demonstration of a capacity we are still trying to understand and document. There are no guarantees, no miraculous promises, only the possibility that we can detect consciousness where conventional methods fail. Matthew was then invited to the stage. The teenager approached shyly, visibly uncomfortable with all eyes fixed on him. Edward noticed his hesitation and, in a gesture of paternal support, stood up to accompany him to Mauricio's gurney. Just do as we've always done in the private sessions, Edward encouraged. Forget the cameras, forget the audience. Just focus on the patient. Matthew nodded briefly, closing his eyes as if to center himself. When he reopened them, his entire posture had changed. The teenage shyness had given way to a serene concentration, almost adult in its intensity. He slowly approached Mauricio, observing him not just with his eyes, but with that extra perception that even he couldn't fully explain. He gently placed his hand on the motionless man's forearm. "Hello, Mr. Mauricio," he said in a calm, clear voice, loud enough to be picked up by the microphones. "My name is Matthew. I'm here to see if I can find you." The auditorium remained in absolute silence. Cameras captured every movement, every expression of the teenager. In the front row, Mauricio's wife held her daughter's hands tightly, the knuckles of her fingers white with tension. Matthew closed his eyes again, his expression alternating between concentration and something like surprise. When he reopened them, he looked directly at Dr. Almeida. "He's here," he said with quiet certainty. "The flame is different from the others I've felt, more irregular, like it's flickering, but definitely present." A murmur ran through the auditorium. Dr. Almeida approached. "Can you elaborate on what you're feeling? Compare it to other patients we've examined?" Matthew frowned, searching for the right words. "It's like when Julia was in a deep state. The feeling was of a small but constant flame. With Mrs. Beatrice, it was a flame fighting against something trying to put it out. Here it's different. It's like a flame that ignites and goes out, ignites and goes out. Not regularly, but there are moments of greater intensity." Almeida nodded, fascinated. "This corresponds to a pattern we call fluctuating consciousness, observed in some patients with severe brain damage. Moments of greater clarity followed by periods of suppression." Matthew continued his assessment, now gently moving his hand to different parts of Mauricio's body. "Here," he said, lightly touching the right side of the patient's head. "The feeling is stronger, as if he's more closer to the surface on this side." Almeida exchanged significant glances with his team. "Interesting. The imaging scans show that the left hemisphere suffered more extensive damage than the right. That could explain your perception." Matthew then asked for permission to do something they had never included in the previous protocols. Leaning close to Mauricio's ear, he whispered something that the microphones did not pick up. The sun was completely disappearing over the horizon when Julia came running up, demanding her parents' attention to show them a drawing she had made. A colorful and surprisingly expressive portrait of the entire family, including Matthew and Sonia. "It's all of us," she explained enthusiastically. "The new big family." "It's beautiful, my love," Beatrice praised, hugging her daughter. "A true work of art. I'm going to hang it in my room at the foundation for when I come to visit the patients with you," the girl declared with the adorable seriousness of children on a mission. In the weeks following the miracle with Julia, the little girl had developed an intense interest in Matthew's work. She insisted that she also possessed a little bit of the gift, although everyone treated it as a childhood fantasy. Still, Edward and Beatrice allowed her to attend some of the lighter sessions, watching from a distance as Matthew worked with patients in advanced stages of recovery. Julia's cheerful and innocent presence often brought an unexpected element of lightness to emotionally charged situations. "When I grow up," Julia announced, completely serious, "I'm going to be a brain doctor like Dr. James, and I'm also going to have the power to see the flames like Matthew. Then no one will be lost in the dark anymore." Edward felt a lump in his throat at the innocent but profound declaration. That was it in the end, the true purpose of the Renaissance Foundation, to ensure that no one else was lost in the dark, whether literally or metaphorically. As night fell completely over Denver, lighting up constellations of urban lights below them, the small celebration continued. Sonia served the special cake she had brought to celebrate the success of the inauguration. Larissa opened a bottle of sparkling wine for the adults and special grape juice for Julia and Matthew. "A toast," Edward proposed, raising his glass, "to the Renaissance Foundation." "To family," Beatrice added, her gaze encompassing everyone present, the Monteros and the Silvers, now inextricably linked by experiences that transcended conventional explanations. "To the flames that don't go out," Matthew added shyly, surprising everyone with his poetic touch, "and to the people who help us find our way back home when it's very dark," Julia concluded, raising her juice cup with so much enthusiasm that she almost spilled it. Everyone laughed and toasted, the clinking of glasses mingling with the sound of the city below. Edward looked at the faces around him, each marked in its own way by the trials they had faced, but also by the joy of a new beginning. He remembered the desperate phrase he had uttered in the hospital chapel when Matthew discovered that Julia was still alive. "I'll give you everything I have. Bring her back." At the time, he had only thought of money, of material resources. He had not imagined that everything I have would include his worldview, his priorities, his very way of life. That night, under the stars of Denver, surrounded by his reunited family, and the promise of a future dedicated to finding people lost in the depths of consciousness, Edward Montero finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It was not the corporate empire he had built, nor the bank accounts, properties, or political influence. The real wealth was there, on that terrace. In Julia's laughter, in Beatrice's hand intertwined with his, in Larissa's renewed gaze. In the unlikely but deep friendship with Matthew and Sonia. This was what he had almost lost, and this, he realized with crystal clarity, was what no fortune in the world could buy, but which, paradoxically, he had won back by offering everything he had. As the night wore on and the conversations flowed, Beatrice watched her husband silently. She noticed the serenity in his eyes, so different from the constant tension of previous years. She approached, wrapping her arms around his waist. "A penny for your thoughts," she murmured. Edward smiled, kissing her forehead. "I was just thinking that, for the first time in a long time, I feel like we are exactly where we should be, doing exactly what we should be doing." "Me too," she agreed. "And you know what's most incredible? It all started with a boy seeing what no one else could see. Perhaps," Edward reflected, "that's what the world needs now. People who can see beyond the apparent, who see possibilities where others only see endings. Like Matthew." "Like Matthew," Edward agreed, "and like we can all learn to be." The conversation was interrupted by Julia, who approached sleepily, rubbing her eyes. "I'm sleepy," she declared, holding out her arms to be carried as she did when she was younger. Edward picked her up, feeling the comforting weight of his daughter against his chest. "Time to go home?" "Yes," the girl murmured, already falling asleep on his shoulder. "To our home, all together." As they said their goodbyes and arranged their departure, with Edward carrying a sleeping Julia, Beatrice walking with her cane, Larissa helping Sonia clear away the remains of the small party, and Matthew watching the city below with the fascination typical of adolescence, a silent certainty hung among them. The journey was not over. There would be more patients to find, more families to reunite, more consciousnesses to rescue from the depths. There would be scientific challenges, bureaucratic obstacles, skeptics to convince, but at that moment under the starry Colorado sky, everything seemed possible. Because when a single person can see the flame where others see only darkness, a whole world of possibilities opens up. And so, the Renaissance Foundation took its first steps, born from near tragedy, transformed into triumph by perseverance, love, and the extraordinary gift of an ordinary boy who, at a crucial moment, looked beyond the apparent and saw the truth that some flames, no matter how faint they may seem, never go out completely. They just need someone to find them and help them grow again. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward, Beatrice and Matthew has touched your hearts. To discover more moving narratives like this, which explore the strength of family ties and the human capacity for overcoming, we have prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking on the left. If this journey of hope and new beginnings has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Every interaction helps us continue to bring stories that inspire and move you. We look forward to hearing which city you watched this moving saga from. Share your impressions in the comments and let us know which moment touched your heart the most. Until the next story.